Greetings and welcome to another C# coding session thingy. Last time we were working on a schedule system for the Minecraft server launcher that we're building. And I actually forgot to start up Visual Studio this time. Anyway, it's quickly done and over with. Let's have a quick look at what we actually did manage to do. We didn't manage to do much, I guess. um, let's see. Schedule dialog. Yes, that's what we were doing. Welcome to newcomers to the stream. This project is basically a standard Windows application that effectively handles multiple instances of running Minecraft servers. Just to quickly showcase, this is what it looks like. And at the moment, I've got two server instances configured. One is a straight up vanilla, and the other one is a modded server. So that one will be running Forge mod loading to handle loading all of the additional stuff that's in there. For the moment, I've basically just put in the most required stuff to actually get it launched, and then added in the latest version of Railcraft just to put some kind of mod in there. At the moment, we are messing with a scheduling system that will allow us to schedule, say, restarts for normal service restarts. At least for modded servers, that is kind of a requirement to keep them running stable and keep them somewhat lag-free. For vanilla servers, well, as long as you're running a very small server, you basically just need to restart it a couple of times a week and that's it. But another part of the scheduling system is the ability to set up, say, daily backups. So we can do backups of the game world and the player accounts and all that stuff. We've employed a little bit of custom UI construction in this setup, just so we can properly display the server profiles, their current status, what they're doing, how many players are on, and such other cool stuff. Part of this UI I think would actually benefit from another small addition. So when we manage to get the whole restart schedule system running, I would like to add one or two extra icons to each server profile. One of them would be showing some kind of refresh or reload icon when it goes into restart mode. Yes, it is a multiple server launcher, which at the moment doesn't have any kind of upper limit to how many profiles you can put in, with the exception that we haven't exactly implemented any kind of profile scrolling. So that's definitely a shortcoming of the listing at the moment. But with the exception of the schedule button we kind of hurriedly added last time, it seems I forgot to anchor it. But at least it'll stick nicely with the size of the window at the moment. So that's one way we can get past the missing scroll option. Of course, at some point we should definitely work on adding that as part of the UI handling. It's some of the stuff that we can do. Yes, this is pure WinForms with a little bit of GDI plus magic. And now that I discovered that shortcoming, I'll go fix that quick. It's just fixing the anchor to bottom instead of top and left. There we go. That should take care of that particular issue. There we go. It now follows the resize. Yes, let's see. Well, there are always debates whether to use WinForms or Windows Presentation Foundation. Use whatever fits your intended project. Don't lock yourself on any specific platform because if you decide to lock on a specific platform, you could easily end up in a situation where that particular platform locks you or prevents you from doing specific tasks for whatever reason. My best advice to any developer is to always pick the platform that best suits the task at hand. It's not a matter of picking this particular language or that particular platform and sticking with that. The best developers out there are perfectly capable to use pretty much any language that they need to use for any given task. And you will always find that the highly experienced and very good programmers out there are multi-platform and multi-language capable. So if you in any way can fit into your box of tricks the capabilities of working with multiple different platforms, definitely try to do so. It will make you a much better developer because you are less reliant on specific libraries that way. Okay, let's see. Schedule dialog. The only thing that we really put on this thing is a list box, a label, and that's basically it. But we kind of still need to set up some kind of profile editing, I guess, for these schedules. We could do some custom UI stuff here as well. Perhaps add in those icons that I was talking about updating the main UI with to kind of show what kind of profile this schedule is. Or we can just stick with a regular list box, which is kind of boring. But it will definitely finish up this particular listing a little faster. So I guess it's up to how fancy we want to do this. In the scheduling system that we constructed last time, let's see, where is it? Schedule Manager is right here. Schedule Manager is basically just a separate class that runs a separate thread that monitors the current time of day and then checks the list of schedules up against the current time of day. And if a schedule matches the hour and minute setting, it will effectively raise one of the two custom events, either indicating it's a scheduled backup event or it's a scheduled restart event. So those are the two events that it currently supports. We may need to add in other kinds of scheduled profiles, depending on, again, how fancy we want to do this. But at the moment, the Schedule Manager doesn't do much except start up its monitoring thread, and then look through the current list of schedules to see if one of them needs to be triggered. It has a built-in reset option, which should allow every schedule to basically recycle and be reusable at the same time the following day. Um, so far, we haven't really tested the code as such because we don't have the means to put in schedules that it could trigger. Hence why we ended up doing a little bit of UI design. Okay, so what do we need to know in order to create a schedule? We need to know the time of day that it should trigger, and we also need to know whether it is a regular restart event or if it should be a backup shutdown, do the backup, and then restart the server again. So if we are creating a backup event, then we also need to specify where to put those backups so we can build some kind of backup handler that basically goes into, say, the vanilla, opens up the world folder, and then grabs all the stuff in here and puts it into a zip file, for example. This particular backup stuff is something that we probably want to build some kind of handler for, so we can basically just, oh, this event triggered now, grab the backup handler, perform this backup and inform me when you're done, something like that. And then when it's done, we can then restart the server. Since we don't have any kind of estimate of how long it will take to do any particular backup, because that kind of depends on the number of player profiles, how many dimensions there are, and how big the world has become. All of that factors into how long it takes to complete the backup. So it'll be rather difficult to estimate exactly how much time it will take to complete a specific backup. So I'm kind of thinking that we build something similar to the schedule manager, but do that for the backup handling, and then simply just tell the backup handler, oh, you need to go do a backup of this particular game server, put the resulting zip file in this location, and then throw an event when you're done doing whatever you need to do, so I can restart the server. That would probably be the best way to go about this, simply because we then don't have to do any kind of time estimation in terms of figuring out when we can restart the server. And if the world then grows too big, risk running into, say, a file being locked while attempting to start up the server. Not a good idea. So I think we'll just do a event-based backup system that just throws an event when it's done. Luckily for us, we have built in a nice little system of assigning a unique ID to each server instance that is running. And those IDs are linked with the server profiles. We've added in into the I needed to get this one. Schedule profiles also have this server host ID assigned to them. The reason for doing that is so we can correctly figure out which of the different server instances this particular schedule triggered for. So we're using that across multiple different lists to keep things correctly synchronized. We can't always expect that all lists will follow the exact same order. One reason why that might go out of sync is if we use the remove button while, say, a couple of servers are running. So the ID system should take care of properly synchronizing all of the different lists and allow us to correctly find the right one whenever we need to do something with a specific entry in one of these specific lists. Okay, let's see if we can get some stuff done on the schedule dialog. Okay, so we can go about this a couple of different ways. We could just do a simple text box that lets us type in, say, 1400 hours, and then a checkbox that says, hey, this is a backup thingy. Or we can use say, a combo box or drop-down box to just pre-select, say, 24 hours and every 5 minutes, for example. Typically, when somebody sets up a predetermined schedule, they would pick the top of the hour or a quarter past or half an hour intervals. So it doesn't really matter which of the two we pick. Doing it with drop-down boxes will make it a little easier for us to kind of preset what choices are available. So we don't have to do much in terms of converting the selections into actual usable data that we can put into our profiles. For configuration purposes, we do have down here the Minecraft server launcher, server profile. This is our current configuration file. And in terms of setting up schedules, we will definitely need to modify this server profile configuration thingy so that we can correctly store those schedules, the scheduled time, as well as what kind of restart or shutdown backup event this particular schedule should be. So we will have to revisit our configuration to get these extra entries put in there somehow. But for now, let's see if we can put something in this dialog. Let's see. We'll do... now, actually, why don't we grab a container and put a group down there? That way we can more easily hide and show stuff when we need it and when we don't need it. So we will rename this to edit. It doesn't really matter what we put in there. Let's see, the for color should be the text color. Why is it showing up in black? That's a good question. Let's just get rid of this. Problem solved. Oh, actually, can we modify the border of this thing? No, it doesn't look like it. Flat style standard. Let's see what this does. Absolutely nothing. Okay, we'll leave it at standard. Let's see. We need to be able to specify at what time this thing should trigger. So we'll put in a label here and schedule time. There we go. And grab a couple of these. Down hour and and we'll change the look of it like so, and that should be enough. Put that here, and we'll need another one similar to this one, so we'll put that here. There we go. And then we probably want to put in a checkbox that allows us to specify that this should be a backup event instead of a regular restart event. So we'll put a checkbox in here. And perform a backup. There we go. Rename this, and then we need to specify where it should store the backup. Grab this one. To backup storage, and then we'll put in a text box, just because it's a little easier showing stuff with this one. And for this one, I would like to set it to read only. Let's get the fixed single set up for it. The back color, we want to do this one. And for the fore color, we don't want to use window text. We would like to use white. There we go. TXT backup path. There we go. And then some kind of browse button so we can specify where we want to store this stuff. So let's grab a button, put that in here. Browse. And then we probably need to mess with this one and do a black. There we go. Alright, so that should take care of most of the excuse me, profile setup for a schedule. So we'll put that here, and then we will set the visibility of the group to false, thereby it's not shown. And then we can resize stuff a little bit, add in a couple of extra buttons. We kind of need a no, actually we'll just need it. We'll leave it at the close. That should be fine. Get this resized a little bit like so. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. Alright, so what do we need to do? We need to populate the two drop-down boxes. This one needs to be renamed, by the way. So we'll put minute in there. And then we'll see about getting these things populated. Do a little bit of my usual cleanup. Put the class constructor down here. I kind of like to have it at the bottom. Old habits die hard, I guess. Back in the day, programming was procedural, and the call order for calling methods was bottom to top. So if the code you were calling wasn't visible above the point where you placed the call, it wasn't accessible. So old habits die hard. I know that this is object-oriented and event-driven and so on and so forth, but it's always good to try and keep some measure of structure to how you organize your code. And this is the way that I choose to organize my code. Feel free to organize it any way you see fit. Whatever fits you is what you should go with. There is no right or wrong way of doing this. It all comes down to I don't know, team decisions for multi-person teams working on the same piece of code, following the same defined standards for organizing code and so on. It's definitely something that you should be aware of, but other than that, organize the code in a way where you can figure out how it's put together. All right. So at some point, get rid of these quick. Um, At some point during the startup process here, whenever this particular form is being shown, we definitely need to pre-populate these combo boxes. Sorry, couldn't remember the name of it. And we probably also want to do some kind of setup that allows us to handle showing the profiles, making sure the UI shows up correctly and acts accordingly. So for doing the UI layout, when the form is shown, we'll grab the shown event. There we go. This is typically the best event to use in terms of, say, pre-selecting a specific entry within a drop-down box or a list box, stuff like that. Also, if you want to focus a specific text box, the shown event would also be the place to do so. Yes, it does. One of the really cool things about how Windows controls work in the .NET framework, and this has been available for God knows how long, is that most controls have the option to anchor. If you choose to anchor all four sides of a control, it will grow according to the size of the window. So you can do all of the auto-sizing stuff pretty easily just by pre-anchoring. That negates the requirement of you building actual code to resize your UI according to the window size. It's basically the same trick that I'm abusing in terms of keeping these 6 buttons locked to the bottom of the window. Instead of anchoring it in all 4 corners, I'm simply anchoring it to the bottom. And when I do that, they lock at their current offset and also scale correctly, as you can see. So there are plenty of options available to let the UI elements do all of this custom sizing and positioning for you, so you don't have to implement the code yourself like we had to in non.NET versions of Visual Studio. There's one thing that's actually missing from this little profile editing thingy, and that's the option to save the changes. So let's grab a couple of more buttons. We definitely need to add those. We also want to put in a cancel, and we might actually also want to put in a remove button. But we're going to utilize a little bit of actually, we'll might as well just put it in here. Save, remove, and cancel. I'll put that here, and then these need to be 4 color. Let's just grab the control text, like so, and this one should probably also have the control text on there. A quick word of advice: if you're doing custom colored UIs like this, yes, it definitely was. It took a little more work to do so, and great to see you back, Joban. Hope you're doing okay today. All right, so we have a couple of new buttons here that we should probably name. So let's call this one Save and label it accordingly. We'll add in a Remove button here, so we can delete these schedules if we no longer need them, or if we, for whatever reason, just don't want them. So put Remove, and then we'll put a Cancel button here. Like so, and put cancel there. Alright, so now we have control buttons for editing these schedule profiles. Sweet. Let's see if we can get some stuff put into this nice little dialog that we're creating. And what are we going to call this one? We will be doing schedule profile editing. So we'll put some of that stuff up here. Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. Tab order is equally easy to handle. Every single control that you can drop on a form, even custom controls, will always have a property called tab index. And the tab index determines the numeric order that hitting the tab key will loop through. So you can control those just by setting the tab index. They will always assume the numeric value of the count of the child controls within, say, a form. So whichever control you drop first will have a tab index of 0. Whichever control you drop as the second will have a tab index of 1. And there is also the good old tag property on most of them, yes. Generally, I advise against using the tag property unless you make absolutely sure that you're capable of, that your code is capable of grabbing whatever data might be in there. Don't know who that is, sorry. In any case, we definitely need to set up those combo boxes. So let's get that done. Put in a method here, populate combo boxes. It doesn't matter what it's called, as long as we've got a method that does it. There we go. And we have one called hour, and we have one called minute. So we'll do the hour first. That's the easiest one. Our items clear, and then okay. Oh, I didn't know that. I honestly haven't kept track of who was part of building what language. I kind of stopped following that, I don't know, 20 years ago. um, let's get a counter up here. This less than 24, and then get that added in there. Add toString, and we probably want to pad this with um, a 0 for the morning hours. So we'll put in a quick method to do that. Um, some would argue it's not needed. I kind of like having miscellaneous different um, helper methods here and there. So we'll do a pad 0 and then do some kind of value. So we have this one do the conversion for us. Result equals value to string. So if this one has a length of 1, we shall put in a 0 before in front of it and then return the result. There we go. And by grabbing that, we can now do pad 0 h, and that will then ensure that we get hours like 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. Pretty straightforward. Okay. The next one would be the drop-down box for minutes. We could just put 60 minutes in there if we wanted to. That could pretty quickly become rather bothersome selecting a specific time of day, though it would give us the full freedom of selecting, okay, this needs to restart at 17 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. It doesn't make much sense doing that, but it would be possible. So I'm kind of thinking we'll just do, I don't know, 15-minute intervals just to make it a little quicker to select stuff. So we'll add C# string class have any old style formatting like there are tons and tons of formatting available on the string stuff. You can do regular expressions, you can do the percent replacement stuff. There are tons of different things that you can do in terms of doing some kind of replacement. You can even do these kinds that somebody came up with at some point and then put whatever you need to replace in there. So plenty of options. Okay, so let's get some hours added in here. We'll just do the pad 0, this one, 15, 30, and 45. That should be enough. There we go. All right. There are options available for doing the percent replacement as well. They're not all that much used because of the curly bracket argument replacement. There's the dollar replacement option as well, yes. So plenty of formatting options available, definitely. It is, in some respects, far more versatile in C# than it is in the C language. But again, it's one of those things where Microsoft has tried to, how should I put this, make it a little easier for developers to get rapid development done when compared to, say, C or C++. Okay, let's see. We need to get these populated somewhere, so we'll do that in the load event. That way, when it comes time to actually show the dialog, we know that they are already pre-populated with those specific values. I know that we set the control to invisible, as shown here. However, I like to be sure, so I'll force it visible here. And this would also be the place where we need to populate the schedule list box, like so. And then we definitely also need to grab hook some kind of event so we can monitor what's going on with the list box. The reason we need to do that is because we need to know when the user selects a specific entry in the list box. And luckily for us, there is a nice little event available for us that can do that for fairly easily. I'll rename this to schedules. There we go. And if we do this one and look at the events, we would be able to grab the selected index changed. I'm choosing this index, this event, simply because I know for a fact that it always triggers on the list box regardless whatever else happens with it. So if, for example, you populate a list box with a bunch of entries and you then clear the list box, that would then change which effectively item is selected in the box. Since there's nothing more in it because you cleared it, it would revert the selected index back to -1, indicating nothing is selected. And even then, this particular event will always trigger. So it is pretty safe to use this to keep proper track of what's going on with the list box. So we'll use this. We'll just grab the template stuff and put this up here. I like to keep the specific control events just above where I put all of the form specific events. And there we go. And we will update the selection stuff. There we go. Quick note, this is strictly for myself. Well, that kind of it kind of depends on what was previously selected. See, if you double click on an item that is already selected, the selected index changed event will not trigger. Only the double click event will trigger. If no item or a different item was selected before the double click event occurs, it will trigger the selected index changed event because it moves the selection to whichever item is being double clicked. There is a little bit of, how should I put this, quirkiness going on, I guess, when you do the double click stuff, because as such, there's no specific double click for a specific item within the list itself. Let's grab the events only. So what you would have to do is kind of figure out whether the double click event occurs on an item or if it occurs outside an item. Say if you have a list box same size as ours and only one item in it, and you then double click on the list box but outside an item, the double click event will still occur, but the selected index would then be the actual indicator that tells you whether this particular item was double clicked or not. So you're gonna have to be a little finicky in getting these particular things working properly together. In information of the item in the status bar? Well, if you're updating a status bar like this, I'll do it quick here. Um, Menus and toolbars. You've got a status strip, for example, with some kind of label in it that you then want to update. The selected index changed would probably be the best place to update your status bar, or whatever hint control you have to display some kind of additional information for this particular item. Because the selected index changed event will always synchronize with whatever item might be selected, or if items are deselected. So that would probably be the best spot to put some kind of extra information in that ties in with whatever's in the list. And the interesting thing about this is that these particular setups are pretty much identical for a regular list box and a combo box. They work exactly the same way. You are so very welcome. Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay, so at the moment, we don't really have any way of interacting with whatever profiles, scheduled profiles might exist for this server instance and this server instance in quotation marks, because we don't know which one it actually is. So we kind of need to have a look at our overall configuration stuff so that we can start building up some kind of schedule listing. We're going to need that in order to populate the schedule list box. And we should probably also try to populate this list box according to what time of day a specific schedule is set for. Instead of just putting them up there in whatever order they were created in. It makes a little more sense that we sort them by time of day instead of creation order. So that's something that we probably want to put into the code logic in here and have it work out which order they should be in. Well, there are a bunch of different ways that it can be done. In terms of using list boxes, a list box, while it can accept some kind of object, it's not always that great of an idea doing it, simply because it effectively takes up more memory to just throw some kind of object after the list box and have it figure out what data to actually show than it does simply adding a string to it. Basically, if you just add in a some kind of string label, you effectively get a string array out of the list box or combo box, and that in itself is just so much easier to handle. You don't exactly have to keep track of things. That's what the selected index is for. So if I grab minute and access the selected index, gets or sets the index specifying the currently selected item. This equals the exact order items were added in. If I were to pre-select, say, index 2, that would be the equivalent of this entry. In this case, it would just show a string with the two characters 3 and 0 in it. And since we're already hooking the selected index changed for the scheduled list box, that will tell us exactly which entry in the list box is selected, and if we uh, um, behind the scenes organize our list of schedules that we need to transfer between the schedule dialog and the main form, or the config profile that we're saving to disk. However we choose to do this, if we just organize that particular schedule list in the order that we want it in before we populate the list box itself, then those indexes will always be synchronized. So if the user selects the second item in the list, then that equals the second entry in our behind the scenes um, schedule list thingy. So we can very easily use these selected indexes to synchronize with whatever data we are manipulating behind the scenes. Most of this stuff is built with a lot of thought behind it to allow us developers to more easily keep track of things, so we don't have to do a shit ton of cross-mapping to make sure that we have the right entry. In some cases, people will argue that it's less efficient clearing the list and repopulating it every time you do some kind of entry change, but I mean, it's just a UI item. Well, that's kind of why I mentioned that we should probably do some logic behind the scenes that takes care of organizing our schedule listing in the order that we want it to. We can do that during the configuration loading, we can do it during the saving, we can do it during the manipulation on this dialog, and then simply have the visible UI elements reflect all the stuff that we did behind the scenes. That's effectively in my opinion, the best way of doing things. Do all of the complex stuff behind the scenes and have your UI elements only reflect what the data behind the scenes actually contains, the order they're in, and that way the UI elements basically just become a part of, or sorry, a visible interface to the data at hand. We'll get there. Anyways, we definitely need to go have a look at our configuration object, which is right here. The reason we need to look into this is because we need a way to store our schedules. And we probably also need to figure out exactly how we want to store them. So since we want to be able to put in effectively any number of scheduled events, we definitely need a list for it. We definitely need to handle these counts, and we need to figure out how we want to store that on disk between run sessions. We could just put them in the actual configuration and then just swap out some lists and have the config object update that. It's something that we will be doing. We did a structure that contains the absolutely most basic information. However, it's still missing one vital piece of data, which is where we should store these particular backups. So we'll put that in here as well. Backup path, like so. And then we'll just start by having that set to empty. And then we'll add in a copy of this that also allows us to create it with the path specified. And actually, why don't we just do backup path here, and then force this to be true. That way we don't have to specify the boolean. There we go. Actually here we could just do this instead. Force this one to false. There we go. Now if we create a new structure of the schedule profile where we only pass the host ID, the hour and minute, then it automatically becomes a normal restart event. However, if we specify a backup path, it becomes a backup event. I would say that kind of depends on whether you're using Visual Studio or some other IDE for writing the code. Microsoft has, in the latest version of Visual Studio, kind of put in naming convention rules that basically doesn't particularly like us using lowercase letters. Naming rule violation. These keywords must begin with uppercase characters, blah, blah, blah. I'm honestly of the opinion that that's none of Microsoft's business, how I choose to put my naming conventions in there. So I'm generally ignoring them. I'm using naming conventions I've used for God knows how many years to keep track of things. Conventions on how to name things is basically according to the old C rules. You use camel case for the most part. That's the generally accepted naming convention, but overall, you may run into teams that require you to follow their specific naming conventions. It's a matter of personal choice for the most part. Whatever lets you keep track of all the different objects and items in a manner where you can recognize that a variable called test does this, for example. Use a naming convention that makes sense to you. For the most part, when you mess with C# code in Visual Studio, you will quickly realize that Microsoft has a pre-built way they want to put things up. This is actually a perfect example. They do the lowercase sender. They do the lowercase e for event args. For the most part, if I'm specifying arguments or parameters for an event that I'm creating, I, for the most part, follow the camel case. So it's yes, a lot of C# developers use all caps for constants. Some follow the underscore whatever variable name for properties. Personally, I don't like doing that. I don't like doing it because the underscore doesn't clearly tell me exactly what this is. For any property that I build, I usually specify it as something along these lines. Let's say this is a caption that we're creating a variable for. I use the prefix mvar and then caption equals whatever. String caption, and then you have your getter where you return it, and you have your setter where you set it. The reason I use mvar is this is actually a relic from way back in the day. Um, it's short for memory variable, which instructs me that this is a property-specific variable. That is the only case where I ever use it. Of course, all variables are memory variables to some extent, but you could also rename it to member variable, or you could use meta variable. It's completely up to you how you exactly want to use this particular term. Back then it was memory variable. Later on it was renamed by some obscure group somewhere to become member variable. It's a relic. And since I'm an old school programmer, of course I'm going to use relic things. um, but it fits with member variable for object properties. Personally, I don't think that this setup is particularly descriptive. It says that it's a caption. It's very easy to overlook the underscore, and that could easily lead to you forgetting to put the underscore when you want to access the variable for the property rather than the property itself. Honestly, I prefer this setup, but again, it's up to you. Um, Completely up to you. Oh man, Fortran. Please don't remind me. Ugh. Um, here we go. Um, in terms of naming conventions for, say, controls or specific other types of variables, for the most part, whenever I'm using temporary variables for whatever, I name them something that fits with whatever this particular variable should do or control. Um, when I name controls that I'm dropping on a form, you might have noticed that I renamed the list box 1 to LST schedules. Um, that is actually an old Visual Basic notation that dates back to all the original GW Basic builds when we started getting options to call methods instead of using line numbers. Um, it dates all the way back then. Basically, the notation goes, the first three letters indicate some kind of data type or object type. In this case, the LST tells me that this is a list box. If I'm doing a group container, like I did here, I prefix it with GRP, short for group. For combo boxes, I use DD as a drop-down, because that's the most common name for what a combo box is. Yes, I mean, do whatever fits your style, whatever fits naming conventions that you're used to. For my personal preference, I tend to use something that lets me spell things out fairly quickly, but tells me at the beginning of the name of the variable or object what this particular thing actually is. It is definitely a personal choice. I prefer having the data type or object type as part of the initial name of the variable that contains this particular object, simply because that lets me grab that quickly when I'm skimming through the code. uh, yeah, well, It's definitely an awesome debate. As I usually say, there is no right or wrong way of doing this stuff. Um, the right way to do this, the right choice of naming convention is something that lets you grasp what the code does at a glance and be capable of grasping what the code does at a glance. As long as you are able to do that, then you're doing your naming convention right. Um, However, keep in mind that when you pick a specific naming convention, if you at some point become part of a development team, other developers in that team might not be able to read your code because of your choice of naming convention. So pick something that works, but you may have to change your habits in terms of naming conventions if you at some point become part of a development team. Um, because as part of a team, um, you will end up in a situation where other developers need to be able to read and understand your code at a glance. And if they can't work out what your naming convention is, then it's going to be impossible. So I'm usually a one-man team as well, but every now and then I do step into team development, and I have found that my current naming convention is typically the easiest for other developers to figure out and then follow. Um, Back in the day, I actually did use a similar syntax, the minute combo, main group, and so on. I did use naming conventions like those, but I found that it was more difficult for other developers to quickly work out what my naming convention was and then follow it from there. And some actually complained that it was horrible to read. So I went over to the old basic naming convention, and it seems that it's a lot easier for other developers to pick up. So I've stuck with that since. Um, in any case, let's see if we can get some more stuff done here. We know that we're going to need some kind of schedule listing. That's what we were trying to figure out. We got the profile updated with an actual backup path, which means we can now use these structures to properly manipulate our setup. So in order for this schedule dialog to become functional, we kind of need a way to drop in a pre-existing list into the dialog when we want to show it, and we also need a way to return whatever profiles were created. Or if they were completely cleared, then return some kind of information that states, hey, there's no more list. So um, for the sake of sticking with some kind of templates setup, we'll do a quick property, and these would be the custom properties for this particular dialog. So here we will use a array of the schedule profile stuff, which is called schedule profile. And since we don't know that, we'll import it. There we go. And then do the schedule profiles. Schedule profile. There we go. And then, of course, expose this. Profiles. Return this one. And we may need to put some kind of handling in here. Not sure. So for now, we'll just grab it, and yes, I know now it's going to tell me that we can simplify this. We may do that at some point. We'll see. Use auto property. That is something new in C# 7, I believe, that they kind of want to try to force us to use auto properties instead. It is less typing. I find it debatable whether it's useful or not, but we'll see. Okay, so with this in hand, we can now at least set a list of schedule profiles, and then we need to implement something that can drop it in the list. Welcome to the stream, Jerry. What kind of advice to a new C# web developer? Plenty of caffeine. In what specific regard? Run. Yeah. Nah. Web developers, web development, ASP.NET, always keep plenty of coffee at hand, and always keep Google ready. That's the most important thing when you do any kind of web development. Other than that, see if you can pick up some startup tutorials for how to build with ASP.NET. Make sure that you pick the foundation for your setup that fits the task at hand. Whether you want to go with web forms or you want to use one of the hundreds of other setups depends on the task at hand. So pick whatever setup that fits the web project that you need to do. It's kind of difficult to give some specific advice on web development because it is so wide. You can't even imagine how big it is. If you need to communicate with databases other than Microsoft SQL, you need to make sure that you go and fetch a connector package for whatever database you need to communicate with. If you need to talk to any of the MySQL family of databases, just go and fetch the MySQL connector and install that on your development machine. Make sure that it's also installed on the target server that this site will be running on. Otherwise, you won't be able to connect to the database. Oracle has a specific connector for Oracle databases that you need to use. If you don't install these, you will be forced to use Microsoft's MS SQL database environments. If you need to be multi-database supportive in your product, you will still need to require those other specific connectors for that particular web product to be able to run. So if, for example, you build a site that's capable of using both Microsoft and MySQL databases, whatever platform this particular site will be installed on in the future must have the MySQL connector installed, otherwise it won't run. Those are some of the frequent asked things about doing development in ASP.NET. But definitely Google is always your friend with these things. Feel free to ask specific things. It doesn't have to be something that covers an entire university course. But yeah, Definitely. Google is always your friend in this. When it comes to C# in ASP.NET, it's just like any other .NET development for the most part. The major difference is that on the web platform, you kind of have a multi-user handling built in for you by means of the session object and the application object. You can use the application object to synchronize across multiple user sessions, and each session object is linked specifically to each unique connection made to the site. So you can use those for, say, login systems and stuff. Okay, where were we? We were about to set up something that can populate the schedule list. So let's see if we can do that. Put a method in here that does that for us. We may need to repopulate the list box multiple times. The reason for that is if we do some kind of change to the current list, add an entry, remove an entry, edit an entry somewhere, we definitely need to be able to repopulate the list or update it in some way. The easiest and simplest way of doing this, so we don't have to build a lot of management code, is to simply just clear the box and repopulate it with whatever entries might be in the schedule list. So we will just do populate list, schedule list box. There we go. And this should be fairly easy. We'll kill the items in the current list, and then we'll simply just loop through our schedule list. There we go. So grab this, less than the length of this one, and then pop them in there. And here we will then run into a slight problem. Well, we can just simply add the time of day. We kind of need to have some way of indicating whether this is just a restart event or a backup event. So we definitely need to check that before we add the entry. So let's see if this one is a backup event. Then we will add it as a backup event. Otherwise, we will add it as a restart event. So we kind of want to sort these. We'll do that shortly. Put in the hour of the restart. Add in a colon and then add the minute. Event minute right there. And then we want to put in backup. There we go. And down here we will do a restart. Nice. Yes. Alright, so this now takes care of populating the list box for us. We still need to build some code that will organize the schedule profiles for us according to time of day. And in doing so, we can also organize them by either backup first or restart first, depending how we want to set this up. We could also just don't really care how it's set up in order according to whether it's a backup or restart event. It doesn't really matter that much as long as we can organize the list somehow. Populate the schedule list box. We'll put that in here. There we go. And that takes care of this part. Now, there's one thing that we are currently not able to do in the dialog, and that would be creating a new event or a new schedule. So, how do we get past that particular problem? Let's see. We'll add in another button. And we don't want you to be inside the group, so for now we'll just put you here and do new. There we go. New. And yes. Microsoft has started deploying, how should I put this, cut down versions of the entire .NET framework called Core. It's faster, it's more efficient because it doesn't have all the bloaty stuff in there. But that also means that some of the, say, rapid development controls and such may not be available in any of the core branches of the .NET framework. In terms of whether you need to learn ASP.NET, if you want to do some kind of web development on the .NET platform, you will need to know at least some of the core mechanics of how ASP.NET works. But once you know how to do stuff, the simple stuff with ASP.NET, it's not difficult switching between the different branches, meaning the regular ASP.NET or ASP.NET Core. It's pretty much the same across any branch of ASP.NET, except each branch determines what kind of extra stuff you have available. Like, for example, do you have a login box control available in standard ASP? Do you have the same control available in ASP.NET Core? No. That would be the major difference between the two. For the most part, if you know some C#, it's fairly easy to get into ASP.NET development. It's not particularly difficult. As per usual, Visual Studio will definitely help you get started there. And the rest of it is up to you in terms of how much time you want to invest into learning all the different aspects of what ASP.NET can do for you. There you see. Basically, the core branch cuts away all of the different, how should I put this, template control stuff that you would find in the normal ASP.NET, thereby increasing its efficiency and for the more experienced users that don't want to use Microsoft's highly limiting control junk, we can go do our own stuff. Sometimes it's a benefit being able to just drop 15 controls on a web page and have Microsoft handle all stuff for you. If you want to build highly customized websites using ASP.NET, all those controls and all those things that Microsoft put in there become highly restrictive and highly limiting in what you can do in terms of full customization of stuff. So it's a choice. What kind of job do you need to complete? What's the task at hand? What's the project? And how fast do you need to make it? But Other than that, there's little to no difference between how one or the other branch works. Um, um, well, in some respects, there's little to no difference between building, say, a WinForms application in C# and building a web page in C#. You use the same core coding in both. The surface that you are interacting with your code is just a little bit different. So yes, you can definitely start learning ASP.NET. Well, I would recommend that you can at least, to some extent, figure out how to do a standard Windows application in C# before you dig into all the assets of ASP.NET. The reason I recommend doing that is to build yourself a little bit of confidence with what you are able to do with the C# code versus, say, a regular desktop application. Um, that will, in the long run, make it so much easier for you to grasp the concepts of what a web setup is versus what a desktop application is. For the most part, if you build, say, a WinForms project like the one I'm working on here, it will teach you a lot about how the code interacts with other elements of the program, and how you can cross-communicate between, say, two forms, which is basically a kind of detached data transfer. And when you're looking at how web pages work, everything in a web structure, and it doesn't matter if this is ASP.NET or if it's PHP or classic ASP or Java server pages, it doesn't matter. Every single page on a website is physically detached from the next. They have no capability of intercommunicating with each other unless you transmit data between them. Um, and by messing about with a few test applications to begin with, that will teach you how to um, at least get some foundation built up in terms of using the code, what the code can do for you, and when you get to the point of trying to do data communication between two forms, that will teach you how to interact between them. And that knowledge will help you greatly when it comes to building some web pages that need to communicate data from one page to another. So yes, I do recommend at least some kind of sandboxing with a standard desktop application on Windows. It will help you a lot in terms of grasping the concepts of how to cross-communicate between elements of a website or the application itself. And somebody decided to drink my coffee. Who is the culprit that emptied my cup? Luckily, I've got more. So let's grab a cup of coffee and see what we can get done. Cheers. Ah, coffee. Coffee, coffee, coffee. Okay. Yes, we still needed to. You are so very welcome, Jerry. And thank you very much for the follow. Oh, Sky, you didn't take my coffee, did you? Yeah, go grab a cup of coffee. Every developer should always have at least a liter of coffee within arm's reach at all times during the day and night. All right, let's see. We can't see what's on the button, so we'll go grab the control text. There we go. No, not the light. Control text, please. Thank you very much. Okay, so The reason that I put the new button up here, um, yeah, I know. um, yes, the pleasant taste of coffee. Um, okay, so I would like to place the new schedule button somewhere on the form. I would like to have it sitting right here. But um, if I put the button here, it'll be inside the group, as you can see. So I don't really want that to happen. So I'll just put the button outside and then in code put it where it belongs. So I don't have to worry about it sitting inside a group. I can't always get the IDE to respect that I don't want this particular button to be inside that particular group for some odd reason. At times, Visual Studio decides, oh, this button is in that position, so I need to move it from the form into the group. No, you don't. It's just easier doing it this way. So we'll put the new button there and then just reposition it. We know for a fact that the group is invisible when the form pops up, and we want the group to show up when we either click the new button or click a specific entry in the list. So that basically means we need to push this button to the further back and in here somewhere, and I can never remember where. Let's see where it is. There is an option to push it behind somewhere. Oh, they are actually here. Send to back. There we go. Okay. Now we've got it sitting behind the group. I'll put it up here, and then in the shown, we'll put it where it belongs. So the new button left position equals the schedule left position, and the top of it needs to be the top of the schedule plus its height plus a measure of space. So let's go with 7 pixels. That should be fine. Okay. That should then probably reposition the new button down here, and then we need to grab the event for it quick, which we do by simply double-clicking it, and we'll go up here, stuff it in here, and that should take care of that. Alright, so if we click the new button, we kind of need to set up a temporary profile that we can edit. So let's see about doing that. We already put up, actually these, yeah, I guess we can leave them here, that's fine. That's a helper method, so we'll move that up here. And yes, I know that some love the regions, some hate them. I find them highly useful, especially when I'm showcasing code, because I can hide away the code that is not in focus at the moment. Helper methods, and we'll grab the pad 0 and move it up where it belongs. There we go. All right. Since I don't need to look at this right now, I can hide it away. We've got the properties here. We probably want to put that in here, which would be the schedule profiles. We don't know yet if we are going to need more properties, but this at least lets us more easily add more. All right, so these deal with populating combo boxes and the list box. Next up, we kind of need to add in some handling for the editing stuff. Region Maniac. Yes, I am. I'm sorry. Feel free to do a search and replace in the project when you've downloaded it. in case you want to download it. Um, anyway, we need a schedule profile variable in here. I don't know. Um, blah 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 blah. We'll do schedule editing. Schedule edit. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. I'll do an empty one that doesn't have anything, so we'll put -1 and we'll do 0 and 0 there. There we go. Now we've got something that we can put editing stuff into. So let's grab another method, and in this case we'll do a method that would let us edit any given schedule profile. If we do a single method to handle that, then we can just place a call to the actual editor and have it handle both new and existing schedule profiles. So we'll do edit schedule. Actually, this should probably be something else. We'll call this temp schedule. That's probably better. There we go. And then grab this and we'll do schedule profile. Do we need to put that on here? Nah, we don't. All right. Okay, so we'll do one that creates a new profile as well and puts it into the temp schedule. All right, so this would then need to pre-configure the two combo boxes to whatever time of day this particular schedule has been set to. We may need to set the checkbox or unset it, and in terms of the checkbox being unchecked, we may want to block or disable the text box and the browse button. So they are inaccessible. In any case, we definitely need to figure out where to set the combo boxes. So first of all, we're using the temp schedule to figure that out. Since we know that the event hour will be between and including 0 and 23, since there are 24 hours a day, we can grab the event hour directly and assign that as the selected index for the combo box. So that pretty much takes care of pre-selecting selected index, pre-selecting the hour. So we'll grab the temp schedule .event hour and set that to selected index. The reason we can do this is because we are adding 0 to 23 both including, which would be a valid hour for a time of day. So fairly straightforward. Now the next one is a little more difficult because when we populated the combo boxes, we made a decision that says 0, 15, 30, and 45. Those are the times that we've pre-configured. So we kind of need to make sure that the minute setup of the temp schedule falls within a range of these 4 selection options. So how do we do that? Well, we may end up in a situation where somebody decides to manually go into this file and edit the properties in here before starting the launcher. And if somebody does that, they might specify an invalid minute interval for whatever schedule he or she chose to edit. So we should probably check to see if it fits within these minute ranges. Yes, exactly. Um, just a sec here. Yeah, I'm gonna have to call you back later. Sorry. Um, okay. Since we already know that event minute is an integer, we don't really need to do any kind of conversion. But we can definitely do the interval. And since this will complain about things, we'll just do temp schedule event minute divided by 15. That should set it up. Calculate the minute index, and then we'll see. Minute, selected index. There we go. That should preset it. All right. Next up, we need to figure out whether this particular event is a backup event or a restart event. So we'll do a quick check and see if it's one or the other. So let's check this one, backup. If it's a backup event, then we need to pre-populate the path text box with whatever path might be stored along with this particular profile. If it's not, then we need to clear it and make sure the checkbox is set accordingly. For the checkbox itself, we could make use of the what's it called, checked changed event, I think it is, or we can simply just do the enabled property of the controls that we need to manipulate according to what this particular setting is. Yes. There is a very ugly tendency to do a bunch of basically redundant classes and build a crap ton of interface declarations and all that stuff. In my opinion, that is what leads to bloaty and laggy applications because you can achieve the exact same goal with something far simpler. Just like I've done here, instead of creating separate classes for all this stuff and building interfaces and whatnot, I'm accomplishing exactly the same thing with a standard structure. It's exactly the same thing, except here I don't have bloaty setups with all of those excessive standard collection objects. It's not needed. You can do it in an array. Granted, arrays don't have tons and tons of different sorting options and adding, removing, inserting, all that stuff. It doesn't have it. It has some of it, but at the end of the day, if you look at how many of those features you actually need to accomplish the task. In how many situations will you ever make full use of a full collection object? Um, 8 out of 10 times you won't ever need it. Um, and if it's just a matter of keeping some list organized in a special way, being able to add and remove from it, well, when you need to do that, implement um, a little bit of code that can handle, say, inserting an entry into an array or removing a specific entry from the array. It's not all that difficult to do. Um, yeah, I've heard that too, and that's actually something that I would very much like to address. Um, There are tons of debates everywhere, tons of recommendations on when you should break up your classes, when you should break up your lists, when you should do this and this and this. And all of these recommendations, in my opinion, stems from people not knowing. Um, the way that I approach object-oriented programming is that any specific class that does a specific task, you need to take a good, solid, long look at. If this particular object that you are creating when constructing your class, keep in mind that a class becomes an object once it's instantiated. That's the only difference between the two. The class is the template for it. If you are creating an object that needs to be able to do a lot of different things. You can, and I stress the word can, create helper objects or structures to assist that main object with whatever task it needs to complete. Um, yes, a lot of them do. And a lot of those people that boast the industry best practice card in those discussions are the people that I generally consider the shit programmers. Um, the way that you should approach class construction is to take a good look at it and determine how many times do I need this particular object within the lifetime of this particular application. Now, if you say, for example, are constructing something similar to what we're doing here, whenever you end up in a situation where I need these profiles at a random number, say we need 2 profiles for this particular setup, but at some point I could end up having 50 servers running. Um, that effectively tells you how reusable a specific class is. If it is a reusable class, you should do what you can to cut the size of that class down to a bare minimum. If it is pure data, my advice is do not, and I stress this, do not create it as a class, do a structure instead. Structures are by definition always memory-wise smaller than an object ever would be. You have no control logic built into a structure because it is simply a custom data type, nothing more. So it will by definition always be smaller because it effectively has no code executing within it. The initializers that we set up for structures, they exist only as part of the actual instantiation of the structure itself. They do not exist as active code once the structure has been initialized. In an object, you would always have code that is attached to the actual object when it's instantiated in memory. So there is a difference. That's why you will see that I make heavy use of structures in pretty much anything I build. the smaller memory footprint your application has, the faster it will run. It's a matter of um, performance over convenience. A lot of people tend to build something fairly simple and end up having 250 classes doing whatever different things they need to do. Um, exactly. Um, um, but overall, you should definitely have a look at how much each individual class needs to do versus how many times you need to instantiate a copy of this particular object. Um, for some setups, you may want to consider doing a singleton. Singletons are basically classes that are only instantiated once during the lifetime of an application, and then have, say, for example, this is actually a pretty good example. The server profile config is actually a singleton. Um, we only instantiate this particular object once during the lifetime of the entire application. Um, and most of the file I/O that deals with loading up and saving the profile configurations are handled in this main class. And from here, it exposes the server profile itself, which is a struct. What do you know? Now, this effectively eliminates the requirement of extra classes just to contain data. That means a smaller memory footprint. It also makes it easier to pass data between different aspects of your application, because passing a struct is because it has a smaller memory footprint, a little faster. It's easier for the garbage collector to figure out that it can actually get rid of this particular data blob once the method or property is done doing its work with whatever data you passed. So you're helping the garbage collector figure out when to release aspects of what is now junk in the memory. Um, but overall, take a good long look at what a specific class that you're attempting to build should be doing, how many times that particular object will be instantiated during the lifetime. Um, well, I guess you could call it premature or optimization. The way I see it is um, whether it's premature optimization or not, well, that's always debatable, of course. The way I see it is if you try to follow the KISS principle, keep it stupid simple, in pretty much all the code you build, that reduces the amount of bugs that could sneak up, and by implementing these how should I put this, smaller memory footprint pre-optimization things, you will also reduce the very real risk of creating memory bloating. That's something that a lot of developers run into at some point. But if you stick with keep things stupid simple and try to avoid building excessive amounts of objects for no good reason, and use structures instead of building a class which only contains data, then yes, it is in a sense premature optimization. But on the other hand, it is far easier to manipulate the contents of a structure and change that if you need to do something in terms of optimization down the line. Overall, I highly recommend uh, that you always attempt to spend the least possible amount of resources that you possibly can to achieve the goal. Um, the reason I do this is some of us that have been around since way before we even got a graphical Windows, we were basically forced to work within the confines of what DOS had to offer. And in any kind of DOS development, you have two segments to work with. You have the code segment, which is 64 kilobytes. And yes, I did say kilobytes. And you have a total data segment, which must hold all the data that you need to manipulate in your application. Um, that is also 64 kilobytes. So for any DOS-based program, um, you will always run into the problem that you have to have your entire program running within 128 kilobytes. That forces you to do data reduction at a very early stage. For me, it's a matter of I grew up with this stuff, so yeah, I do it naturally because I was kind of forced into this because back then we couldn't do anything else. So it's a matter of course, experience to some extent, but also if you go into your skill honing with a greater understanding of how doing these things as part of the initial implementation does have an effect, then it will help you build more stable, more solid applications in the long run, and you will be able to build applications that can accomplish a huge task without eating up a shit ton of resources. Um, Most developers these days don't really care if you spend 2 or 3 or 4 gigabytes of memory just running, say, a photo gallery. Um, well, actually, there was a year 2000 problem in some applications. Um, Yes, that was actually one of the issues. The main problem there was that the developers of the applications back then assumed that it would always be 19 something. They didn't account for the turn of the century, which meant some financial systems actually went to 1900 instead of 2000 at the turn of the century. Um, but yes, that's the basic premise for it. In other situations where, how should I put this, where it counts in terms of putting thought into your data structures and how you choose to um, effectively request memory space to work with is when you get into, say, network programming, or you get into specific binary file programming. Now, if you grab a Boolean, for example, that is basically a bit. It's on or off, it's true or false. Depending on what kind of architecture you're compiling up against, 32-bit or 64-bit, that Boolean might take on the size of a byte, 8 bits, or it might take on 8 bytes just to allocate a true and false flag. Now, if you have, say, 1,500 such flags that you need to convey to, say, a server in terms of changing some kind of setting that you then need to transmit back to the server, and you need to convert those 1500 booleans into a data stream that you can transmit over a network connection. If each of those boolean flags takes up 8 bytes and you have 1500 of them, and you convert them just by using the regular means that are available, say in C#, and each of them takes up 8 bytes, then you end up having to transmit a 12 kilobyte package over the network to the server, just conveying these flags. However, if you do some more intelligent bit packing, then you could end up doing 1500 divided by 8 and get a total transmission size of 188 bytes to convey 1500 different true-false settings. That is a far smaller package of data you need to transmit. That in terms works in your favor when it comes to paying the bandwidth costs for transmitting data back and forth. Running a server somewhere on the internet, having it hosted, is definitely a matter of figuring out how you can compress data. The less data you need to transmit, the less expensive it will be renting that server host space. Some countries, they have a bandwidth cap, some don't. In Denmark we don't, for the most part, for having an internet connection somewhere. I know that a lot of states in the US are bound by bandwidth caps for regular customers. So it's a matter of conserving data instead of, I don't care. The more data you can conserve and compress, the better your application will perform, and the cheaper it will be in the long run. So I can only stress the importance of stop the I don't care attitude and put some thought into how you design your code. Try to minimize the memory footprint, try to minimize the resource footprint as much as you can, and while you're at it, you might as well get into the good habit of doing it at design level, not during the optimization phase. Yes, exactly. JSON is a nice feature of Java, but in my opinion, you should seriously consider crunching up JSON and throwing it in the trash can. It is way too bloaty. And anyone that decides to, oh, I'm just going to do things in JSON, yeah, of course you do that when you're in Java because, hey, that's there. But honestly, JSON is a text-based setup, and way too many applications today use JSON to communicate some kind of setting for, say, a graphical object within a game that's being transmitted over the network in more or less plain text. It's pointless, it's bloaty, and it is wasteful. Things should be, in my opinion, binary compressed as much as possible so we can reduce the excessive amounts of data being transferred back and forth. And it's only going to get worse. Anyways, I kind of need a quick nature break, so I think we will take a quick break, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes, and then we'll pick up where we left off. See you in a bit, guys.